Right, let's crack on. Others could take their seats in a few minutes. So, is there anybody here who actually still thinks that 5G is probably a good idea? And no? Do we need it? Yeah. Well, let's have a look at what's happening here. I mean, for those of you who aren't aware of my background, I spent 20 years in the oil and gas industry, in the oilfield services part of it, with a company called Schlumberger. I was one of the first civilians to go into Kuwait at the end of hostilities in 1991, and whilst I was obviously aware of certain geopolitical shenanigans at that time, what I witnessed firsthand in Kuwait made me realise that actually it was a whole much dirtier game than even I was prepared to acknowledge at that time. It still took me 7 years to actually extricate myself from the corporatocracy. But I mean, I'll just give it to you in a nutshell. Anyone who thinks that the Iraqis set the wells alight in Kuwait is delusional. The wells were set alight by US and British special forces, and the purpose was to demonise Saddam, to take Iraqi oil off of the global market, because he was considered to be a loose cannon and might flood the market, and then oil obviously the price would crash. So obviously this is before the days of the internet, and before the days of really mass communication. And it used to take hours sometimes to even make a phone call out of the Middle East to other parts of the world. So by 1998, I decided that there was no way I was going to continue in that environment, and by 2001, after the events of 9/11, I basically became a geopolitical analyst. So that's what I was doing up until 2012, and because of my background in the oil and gas industry, when the moratorium on fracking was lifted in this country, I realised that I actually needed to raise awareness of the concerns and dangers of the unconventional hydrocarbons industry. So I stopped what I was doing. In fact, I cancelled all my plans for 2013, and I put together a national tour, 63 dates around the country, to simply try and get the word fracking into people's vocabulary and to encourage them to look at what this industry had done in terms of the devastation that it had caused in the US and Canada and Australia in particular. So, although David Cameron lifted the moratorium that was in place on fracking in this country, I have to say that nearly 7 years on, I think the anti-fracking campaign has been one of the most successful environmental campaigns this country's ever seen. Communities around the country have come together to resist this industry. So there has not been a national anti-fracking campaign. There have been communities, and some communities have been more successful than others, and some communities have been infiltrated. But even where the infiltration has occurred, basically the industry hasn't managed to do what it set out to do. So the lesson that we've learned from that is the power of community. And when a community starts to realise their community is under attack, then fortunately enough people in the community come together to build a local resistance. The problem, of course, is this. And it's amazing how the need for a salary check can actually prevent people from acknowledging what they know to be the truth, and actually get them to present something that they know to be false. And for others, of course, the salary check is simply a limiter in terms of their time, because obviously they have to keep a roof over the head of the family and food on the table. And as we know, it's just become more and more difficult to do that on a basic working week. So many people are now working outrageous hours, which means they have less time to get involved. And as I'm going to show you at the back end of my presentation, the retiree community is extremely important, because it may well be the last generation of retirees that actually has their health, that has time, because obviously the retirement age is being pushed higher and higher, and probably the last generation of retirees that actually has a degree of financial independence. And as I go through this, you'll see that some of these dots clearly come into play. But the awareness is rising, and the fact that, you know, we've got lots of people here in Torquay on an early summer's evening is fantastic. The average attendance at 5G events in places where there hasn't been anything so far has been 150 plus. And we had an event in a little village just outside Cardigan in Wales in March, in a village called St Dogmaels. And because of the location, people came from all over south of Wales. So we had people from Aberystwyth, people from Swansea, from Carmarthen, obviously Cardigan, and they were motivated to go away and sort of basically get their local groups together. And where you find that groups come together quicker is in areas where there is community. So in the southeast of England, basically we did an event in London, and you know, although it was a pretty good turnout, I don't anticipate that we're going to see a very rapid rise in community groups in London, because there's no sense of community in the southeast of England anymore. It's just a dormitory for people working in the city. But in Wales, they really got after it. And the group that formed in the Gower, or groups that formed in the Gower, made contact with their MP, a lady by the name of Tonia Antoniazzi. And she managed to get a debate called in Westminster Hall. So it's not actually in the House of Commons, but it does get recorded in Hansard. And this is the first time that an MP has called for a debate on the subject of 5G rollout, and at least got the concerns into the public domain, or at least into Hansard. Now this is a two-edged sword, of course, because it's great, because it does give us the opportunity to show a little bit of the video, and I'm going to show you that in a second, of her giving that presentation. But it also means that the industry are now very aware that there is a growing movement across the country of people who are concerned that this technology has not been proven to be safe. So I'm going to play you a short clip, and I'm going to encourage you also to, if you can spare the time at some point, to watch this video, because it's on the web, it's on YouTube, but runs for about an hour. But watch the video, because it is indeed very compelling, and some of the responses that she gets from the minister, you know, you just want to reach for the sick bag. But anyway, I'm going to show you a short clip of her delivering the presentation.
We now move on to an important motion about the health-related effects of electromagnetic fields, and I call upon Tonia Antoniazzi to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm honoured to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Holborn. This Westminster Hall debate is indeed a very timely one. It comes off the back of a historic decision by Glastonbury Council to oppose the rollout of 5G due to a severe lack of evidence about its effect on the health of those living and working around 5G sites. In the words of Martin Paul, Emeritus Professor of Biochemistry at Washington State University, putting in tens of millions of 5G antennae without a single biological test for safety has got to be about the stupidest idea anyone has had in the history of the world. We have seen the rollout of 5G postponed in Brussels when Céline Frémaux, Environment and Energy Minister, identified that it was not compatible with Belgian radiation safety standards. And a planned upgrade to 5G in Geneva was stopped through the application of the precautionary principle until independent findings on possible health damage become available. Now, I was approached by an old friend who is now a constituent about how a sensitivity to electromagnetic fields seriously affects her health and the way she lives her life. Annalie lives in France for part of the year and has to return to Wales as her health deteriorates working as a university lecturer. I was intrigued by the effects and wanted to know more, so have been in contact with a number of people who either have concerns about the health-related effects or are suffering firsthand. Following discussions with others, I was keen to secure a debate on the subject because the health concerns are being swept under the carpet by the government, and there appears to be an absolute refusal to acknowledge that these health-related effects even exist. To initiate a conversation about electromagnetic sensitivity has had members of my own team and family telling me that it is all made up. That in itself motivated me to keep reading and to speak to as many people who I can in Wales and beyond who are suffering. And what shocked me was the number of people who have ES who are too afraid to talk publicly about their illness, as they are really wary of being humiliated and ostracised. Electrosensitivity is a symptomatic sensitivity to electric or magnetic fields of any frequency, including radio frequency transmissions. It's a condition first described in 1932. It's when a person's physiology is affected by external electromagnetic fields, giving rise to a spectrum of symptoms, often neurological. It is therefore an illness caused by environmental agents, essentially an environmental toxic pollutant. It's a condition that can arise due to continued exposure to an environment polluted by man-made EM and RF wireless signals at levels at orders of magnitude below heating effects, and is well understood in many other countries. Symptoms include headaches, fatigue, disturbed sleep, tingling, pains in limbs, head or face, stabbing pains, brain fog and impaired cognitive function, dizziness, tinnitus, nosebleeds, palpitations and others. But as we have seen already with chronic fatigue syndrome, there was a disbelief about those presenting with symptoms, and indeed construed by others as a psychological illness, through a lack of knowledge and difficulty to diagnose. I believe that electrosensitivity will be recognised in years to come, hopefully sooner, and that the government will have to own up to their part in that. And I will be honest with you and say that this is not a subject I ever thought I would be standing here talking about. Yet, as a mother, I was always keen to charge my son's phone outside of his bedroom, while never applying the same rule to myself. Parents seem to care more for their children, especially when we hear that masts being put up on primary schools, more recently one in Haringey, they are stopped and the masts are no longer being put up there. There is something in this. I do worry also about the impact of social media on mental health and the increasing addictive nature of smartphones, which is impacting on the lives of the youngest of children. There is some evidence for effects of radio frequency signals on mental health and behaviour in children and young people. Yet they are not currently considered when trying to address the current increase in mental health and behavioural problems in the UK. Minister, can we include the effects of wireless signals when considering solutions for mental health and behavioural problems in children and young people? The recent advice from the UK Chief Medical Officers on screen time and well-being in young people has ignored evidence for the adverse effects of wireless signals.
Okay, one of the things that has become very evident is that it is newly elected councillors and newly elected MPs that tend to be more receptive when concerns are raised with them. Because once MPs have effectively been in Parliament for even just one term, or councillors even for a term, then they become corrupted by the need for compromise. There are exceptions that prove the rule. There are exceptions without a shadow of doubt. But sadly, and I have, over the past 6 years, I have attended, I won't say hundreds, not that, but I've probably attended at least 40 council meetings, council hearings, planning meetings. And in every case, the councillors that are more outspoken about their concerns tend to be those that are relatively new to that role. You know, and they stood for office because they had the genuine desire to do the right thing for the community that elected them. But as I say, sadly, once they've been in office a little while, they learn that basically compromise is the nature of the beast. And you know, sadly, Sarah Wollaston is a classic example of that. You know, when she stood for office in 2010, I have absolutely no question, no doubt whatsoever that she stood with the best of intentions. She was a GP, and her motivation was that she wanted to make positive change to the National Health Service. But you know, today, I don't think she's going to get re-elected, but anyway, that's another side of it. So, where we have the opportunity to speak with local councillors, district councillors, county councillors, if the councillor has been in office for 20 years, you are more likely to get a standard rebuttal. It'll be a sort of an industry crafted response that they can then just fob you off with. You're more likely to get the level of interest that Tonya Antonazzi showed if they're relatively new to the position. And once she had made that presentation, the industry and its sort of puppet media were on it immediately, and this is from one of their blogs, the Inquirer. MPs claim 5G electromagnetic radiation is carcinogenic and kills insects, and in the body of the text says a group of ill-informed MPs have argued that 5G electromagnetic radiation is carcinogenic, worse for the environment than aviation, and could wipe out the world's insect population. The claims were made in a debate moved by Gower MP, Tonya Antonazzi, on Tuesday, where MPs debunked the risk of health-related effects, MPs discussed the risk of health-related effects of electromagnetic fields, a long-debunked urban myth. So this is weaponized vocabulary, a long-debunked urban myth. So in other words, that's a phrase that doesn't have any substance, but it's designed to shut down any further discussion. Long debunked. Oh, that's been long debunked. I mean, anybody who uses that phrase, what they're really saying is they haven't researched it, and so they're simply going to regurgitate the weaponized vocabulary used by the mainstream media. It goes on, Antoniazzi cited Washington State University's Dr. Martin Paul, I can't even spell his name right, it's P-A-L-L, who has described the 5G rollout as absolutely insane. Paul also claims that electromagnetic fields are responsible for autism and is a favourite of conspiracy theorist David Icke. Weaponised vocabulary again. Anytime that David Icke is invoked, then the media are basically saying, well, if you believe that, then you've got to take into account everything else he believes in, and therefore you must be crazy. It's weaponised vocabulary intended to shut down any further discussion on the subject. Now, not too far away from here, in Totnes, in Dartington actually, almost exactly, I think, a year ago, just over a year ago, the parents at Dartington Primary School took their children out of the school. This was after it had been reopened, because this was designed by the transition town. And basically the design was so poor that it had leaks. They tried to plug the leaks, they couldn't find where the leaks were and ended up having to demolish the school. And when it was rebuilt, and the parents discovered that there was a Vodafone phone mast right outside the school. So the parents staged a protest and basically stated that they weren't going to let their children go into school until the school confirmed that the mast would not be activated. Well, so that was a year ago. Consider the possibility that the parents were extremely prescient, because this report I'm going to show you now from CBS is from April of this year, and it's regarding a cancer cluster amongst children at Ripon Elementary School in California. So just take a look at this.
The phone company Sprint shut down a cell phone tower on the campus of a California elementary school after some parents said it may be linked to several recent cases of childhood cancer. Now, those families at Weston Elementary School in Ripon claim the tower could have exposed their kids to harmful radiation. Sprint says the tower is safe and has operated well below federal safety limits, but the company turned it off anyway and plans to move it to a new location. Carter Evans spoke to the families at the center of the controversy.
My son missed growing up with his friends. My son lost all of his hair. It's not something that I wish on anybody, to watch their child go through what our children have gone through.
Kelly Prime's son Kyle was just 10 years old when he was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 2016. 5 months later, Kyle's friend and classmate Mason Ferrulli developed brain cancer.
14 hours to get the tumor out, and he had 5 weeks of inpatient rehabilitation. He had to learn to walk, talk, eat, everything all over again.
2 more kids at the school were diagnosed this year.
At what point are you saying, we ought to take a close look at the school here?
The moment that I found out that Mason had been diagnosed, it popped into my mind that something was not okay.
The moms believe the recent increase in cancer cases could be caused by radiation from radio frequency, or RF waves, coming from this cell tower located on the elementary school campus.
It is classified as a possible carcinogen. That tells us that there is some evidence out there. We're not naive to the fact that there could be other components out there, other environmental influences, but the bottom line that we feel in regards to this tower is it doesn't belong there if there's any indications that it's unsafe.
You figure it's not worth the risk.
Absolutely.
The school district hired engineers to measure the exposure and concluded the tower met government and industry standards in all respects and posed no threat to student safety. The parents hired their own investigator who found much higher RF levels than the district did, but still within government safety standards.
Sprint takes safety very seriously.
Sprint's Dharma Nordell says 3 tests have shown the cell tower is operating 100 times below the federal limit.
Let me just ask you flat out, does Sprint believe that tower could be causing cancer?
Absolutely not. It is not a safety concern to the community, but we do hear the community's concerns, so we're quickly working to relocate the tower.
That is the effect of salary check. No hesitation. Is the phone tower in any way responsible for the cancer cluster? Absolutely not. And she doesn't know. And this is the importance of the precautionary principle, which is very clear in its statement that basically if there is any likelihood of risk, and in this case obviously serious risk, then it should not proceed. Now we've already seen, again with fracking, that the British government is prepared to just ride roughshod over the precautionary principle because the evidence from around the world of the contamination of soil, water, air, the impact on livestock, the impact on pregnant women was clear and was growing at a phenomenal, is still growing at a phenomenal rate of knots, and yet the government just says, no, well, this is the UK. We do things differently. Well, we don't at all. And as you saw from the clip that John played earlier, Senator Blumenthal, and this, by the way, was the second meeting that he convened on the subject, because he'd actually asked the industry in December about studies that the industry was sponsoring to prove the technology to be safe, and he gave them 2 months to come back with the evidence to show that the industry was taking the concern seriously, and you saw the response. There are no ongoing studies which prove this to be safe, and this is the way the industry works, because they won't do a study, because if they do a study then they're going to have to deal with the results. Whereas if they don't do a study, then there's nothing to, you can just keep dismissing it. And a classic example of not doing a study is the Camelford water incident. Do you remember that, 1988? Where a tanker load of aluminium sulfate was accidentally dumped into the main drinking water of the community. And it was a terrible accident, no doubt about that. I mean, the tanker driver turned up at the facility after everybody else had gone home, and he phoned them and said, I've come with the delivery. And they said, yeah, we know, we've left the key under a stone at the gate. And he said, well, how will I know which tank to put it in? And they said, well, we've left you a key that will only fit the tank. Except they hadn't. They'd actually left a master key. And so when he opened the first tank, he thought, save him the task of going around all the other tanks, so he dumped it straight in. And of course this led to a number of people dying over the next few years, and a number of people obviously suffering some very, very debilitating health effects. But it was denied. So, anyone want to hazard a guess as to when it was finally admitted by the British government that there had indeed been an extremely unfortunate and nigh on tragic event?
30 years.
Well, close, it was 2011. So 2011, so it's 23 years. 23 years. And then it was finally acknowledged that there had been a problem. Well, and even when there is an admission, people just forget about it very quickly. Again, in Devon, the floods of 1952 in Linton and Lynmouth, which killed 36 people, and it was finally admitted in 2001 with the release of MOD documents that the RAF had been cloud seeding and were conducting cloud seeding experiments over Exmoor at that time. So whilst there wasn't a definitive statement that the cloud seeding triggered the floods, then certainly the timing is remarkably coincidental. So the establishment works on the basis that as long as you can just keep parrying all of these requests for studies, then there's nothing to actually report. So let's have a look at what 5G is, because as John said, this is not just an upgrade of 4G. And I'm going to tell you that I certainly didn't realise that I had any electrosensitivity until I was staying at an apartment here in Torquay back in 2016. Now at the time I was full-time on the anti-fracking camps, and but I was in the process of preparing for the Alternative View conference, and so I was coming back to Devon to do the final preparation, and a good friend of mine who still lives here in Torquay, but every winter she goes off to Indonesia to get the winter sun, and so she called me and said, "Hey Ian, you know, while I'm away, you're welcome to use my apartment." So I thought, well, that's great, you know, because the weather was pretty rough at the time, and so staying in an apartment seemed better than staying in the caravan. Anyway, I stayed in the apartment for 3 nights, and I just couldn't sleep. And I couldn't work out why, because I never normally have any problem sleeping. So anyway, it was only when I clicked on the Wi-Fi connectivity on the computer that I realised that the apartment that I was staying in, which is on the hillside, was being absolutely bombarded with everybody's Wi-Fi, plus of course all the other phone signals. Now I couldn't prove, obviously there's nothing you could see, but anyway I decided to go back to the caravan, which is just in the southeast corner of Dartmoor, and slept like a baby. So I never went back to the apartment. And when I was with my youngest son recently in the Festiniog slate mines, at one point we were 1,300 feet underground, and I suddenly realised that the ringing in my ears had stopped. Now how many people here have some form of tinnitus? Yeah? Yeah, the percentages are pretty consistent, you know, at every event now. And again, I have no proof that it's triggered by the electro-smog, but it seems to be the only thing that's changing. And obviously when I'm in a place that doesn't have it, then the ringing stops. I mean, fortunately it's a level where I can still operate, but I know some people have it a lot worse. But the purpose of 5G is to literally facilitate the Internet of Things. And this means that literally everything will be tracked. And back in 2009, at the Alternative View conference that I held in Bristol, I invited a guy called Greg Nicoletus to come over from Brisbane. And I flew him over because, in my opinion, he was the world's leading researcher into the artificial intelligence agenda. And the title of his presentation was First Your Pets, Then Your Kids, Then You. Well, and we're seeing the and then you being rolled out in Sweden right now, which has gone basically cashless, and people are being encouraged to have the chip inserted under the skin in the hand, so that instead of putting your phone or your card in front of the machine, you just wipe your hand over. And and you think, well, who's going to do this? But I mean, basically, our youth are being conditioned to embrace technology. And the most outrageous example of this was a lady by the name of Pippa King, who's done some amazing work in keeping the biometrics agenda out of schools. And she was at the zoo, and there was a child of about 2 in a pushchair, and the mother had wheeled the pushchair up to the sort of glass screen in the lion house. Anyway, Pippa, out the corner of her eye, saw that after about 3 seconds in front of this window, the kid went trying to swipe the screen. So the child had not actually yet managed to discern between virtual reality and reality. And this is going to be an increasing issue. And as we find more and more people, particularly youngsters, living their lives in a headset. Marks and Spencer's have chipped every item of clothing that they sell for the last 5 years, purely for stock control. But with the advent of the 5G network, with everything that is chipped, because that's the whole idea, that everything that is produced is chipped. It has a unique IP address and can therefore be tracked throughout its entire life before it goes into recycling or destruction or whatever. And people say, well, but who would want this information? It's not a who, This is artificial intelligence. And whether we like to think we are or not, we are creatures of habit. And artificial intelligence will work out the algorithms of what we're doing. And we're giving them that information all the time. How many people have had the experience of where you've just been having a random conversation with somebody about something, and then 20 minutes later you go to your phone and there's an ad come up for exactly the item that you've just been talking about? Yeah? Nobody's listening to your phone, right? The artificial intelligence is tapping in and is using the algorithm to then effectively feed Amazon or whomever with the information they need to then direct that advert to you. And this is the thin end of a very, very fat wedge. And many of you, I'm sure, have seen the film Minority Report. Well, if you haven't watched it recently, because I think it's like 20-something years old or so now, nearly 20 years old, but watch it, because it is extremely prescient. Now, let me tell you, I could take you back through to 1932 and show you the documentation that has been produced ever since 1932, and the think tank documents, and the agenda is very clear. So you're hearing it for the first time, and some of you may be going, "Oh, this is outrageous, it sounds just like sci-fi, science fiction." Yeah, well, it's meant to, unless you do the background research, then you find actually everything is being rolled out was predicted. In 1932, they had the vision, they didn't have the technology. Their vision has become even more dystopian, and now they have the technology, and they're rolling it out at a phenomenal rate of knots. So the Internet of Things is the element here, and of course it basically means that you think you're in the privacy of your own home, but there will be no such thing as privacy, because everything will have a camera in, everything will be monitored. I mean, Samsung admitted in 2008 that back then it was called HD Ready TVs, but every HD Ready TV had a built-in camera. And of course you weren't told that, it wasn't in the manuals. And Samsung eventually had to acknowledge that they were able to tap in to the camera image, and they were purely using it for for research purposes. To see who was actually sitting down watching their TV. So that was 11 years ago. And in fact, it was down to the Daily Mail, actually, I believe, that eventually ran a double-page spread on this Samsung technology. Now, another purpose for 5G is autonomous vehicles. And of course, this is the smart motorway agenda. And the whole idea of smart motorways is to prepare them for autonomous vehicles that don't need a driver. Now, obviously, initially, we're going to see go through a phase of vehicles that can be switched between driver mode and autonomous mode. And let me hazard a guess, and I'll be conservative. Within 30 years, probably less, quite a lot less actually, but within 30 years, I'm being conservative, it will not be possible to drive your vehicle down the slip road onto a motorway unless you can switch it to autonomous mode. So every vehicle on the motorway will have to connect into the 5G system. So if you don't have the faith in the technology, then you won't be driving on the motorways. And then within 50 years, probably less, no vehicle will have driver control capability. And in fact, very, very few people will own vehicles. Vehicle ownership amongst under 30s today is the lowest ever recorded since basically the 1970s. When people were 16, 17, you buy an old rust bucket and it would be your means of getting around town. But very, very few, well, I would say very few, but a lot less people. And my eldest children are classic examples of this. My eldest son is 40 this year. He learned to drive in the US. He passed his test at 16. He drove for the years that he was in the US up until he was 19. And then when he came back to the UK, he has never driven since. And my daughter, she's never driven in the UK. She's now in Australia. And she got her driver's license in the US. Got it updated when she went to Hawaii to do diving instruction, and then used her Hawaiian license to transfer to her Queensland license in Australia. But she never drove in the UK. So what's happening, and why didn't they drive in the UK? Because of the cost. And so, what we're seeing here is private ownership amongst the youth of vehicles, of registered keepers, is reducing. And then that will play out eventually to the point where the number of people who own a vehicle is greatly reduced. And your insurance premiums will be astronomical because all the other vehicles on the road will be autonomous. But if you want to retain the privilege of driving, then you're going to have to pay the privilege through insurance. The other factor is tax. Because obviously what's happening is as hydrocarbons are phased out of vehicles, then obviously they're going to be electric. Well, at the moment, every one of us who buys fuel pays a tax for every mile we drive. And you can calculate what it is. If you know what the mileage you're getting from your vehicle, then you can very quickly calculate how much tax you're paying per mile. So I know that with my vehicle, I am paying 7 pence in taxation for every mile I drive. That's what I'm paying through the pump. So when vehicles no longer need to fill up at the pumps, then they've got to find a way to get the tax. So it's going to be done on the basis of miles driven, which is why every vehicle that has been produced since, I believe it's 2012, has a tracking device in there. Not necessarily activated, but they are in there. And that's for insurance purposes, because obviously insurance companies are offering discounts for those people who sign up to be tracked and all their driving habits monitored. So, people are getting accustomed to this kind of surveillance. So, on Sunday, this past Sunday just gone, the Sunday Times ran this double-page spread, and it was about the outrageous Chinese and the rollout of the technology in northwest China, which is an area of China that's primarily Muslim and considered to be, if there's a dissident part of the country, it's going to be in that area. Now, China had previously just ignored this area and just left it to its own devices, but it's actually now built a high-speed rail link into the area. And the whole idea is to integrate the northwest region into the rest of the country. But because they don't trust these people, because they are fundamentally dissidents, so they've installed this outrageous surveillance network. And you find it online, and unfortunately, of course, with the Sunday Times, you have to actually pay to read it. But part of that is the experiment to control a population. That's part of the thing down here. The experiment to control the population. And I'm reading this, and I'm thinking, this is classic deflection. Because it's exactly what they're doing here. But how is it presented here? 5G. Oh, you need this because we have such phenomenal increases in the rate of dementia. So we need to now make all of our houses dementia ready. So we install the same basic technology that the Chinese are installing for, and they're not making any secret about it, basically, we don't trust you, then you're going to live in a city that is surveilled to the nth degree. But of course, we're a democracy. So of course we wouldn't do things like that. Well, we wouldn't certainly tell the truth about it. But this is showing the increase, the anticipated increase in dementia. That's a whole other story. But, there is this admission that there is going to be a massive increase in dementia, along with cancer, by the way. Because cancer, it's estimated that 1 in every 3 people right now will develop some form of cancer in their lives. By 2030, it's estimated that will be 1 in every 2, and by 2040, it'll be everybody. Well, it's not really surprising when, we're creating an electro-smog and everything that brings with it. So here's the sort of articles that you can see promoting the idea of smart technology in your home, and it's all to make your home dementia friendly. And by the way, in North Yorkshire, they've actually got the logos on the side of the police vehicles now that say dementia friendly. And when I was up there, I was asking one of the police officers, I said, does that mean if I come out of the station late at night and pretend that I can't remember where I am, then you come along and take me home? And the guy said, I've no clue what it means. So, it's marketing or something. And by the way, this was from earlier this year, and this is from May, actually. And this is Croydon and Bromley in South East London. where they are testing the technology for the autonomous vehicles. Obviously, they're not driving around without a driver in them yet, but they're actually testing the technology to see if it works. And the issue with this is they need a phone mast every 150 to 200 meters because of the frequency, because it doesn't have the same reach as the lower frequencies. It's line of sight, no blockages, nothing to interfere with the signal. But that's why they're looking to use the street lights, and that's why they're changing out the street lights, and we'll talk about that again in a second, just to endorse what John was saying. But the street lights are going to be the primary mounting furniture for the 5G transmitter receiver. And obviously in some parts of the country, they're already being installed. Mark Steele in Gateshead, he started his campaign when he realised that the light management device that was mounted on the tops of the new LED street lights they were putting up, 35,000 of them around Gateshead. And although Gateshead Council denied that they are using them as 5G, the reality is that the device on the top, which is produced by a company called Harvard Technologies, it's a leaf nut product, and coincidentally, as the focus was on that leaf nut product, then Harvard Technologies went out of business last December. But the documentation from Harvard Technologies states quite categorically, and this is the Director's Report 2016, it states quite categorically this leaf nut product has been developed for the backhaul of data. In other words, it's part of a phased array data acquisition system. So each transmitter receiver picks up a little bit of data, and then obviously once you collate it all, then it builds the bigger picture. And this is a military technology that is now being effectively rolled out on the civilian population. And Barry Trower has made that observation on a number of occasions. So we know that there have been massive increases in the rate of depression and suicide amongst ex-service personnel. And this is put down to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is linked, not necessarily directly, but linked to battlefield trauma. Except that many of those ex-service personnel who are suffering from the PTSD, the depression, and those who commit suicide, they weren't even necessarily on the front line. Not exclusively, but many weren't. So what is the common denominator? The common denominator is their exposure to battlefield microwave technology. Now, Barry Trower spent many years trying to raise awareness about the dangers of the Tetra radios. You know, the Tetra radios was the digital radio that the police wore on their chest here. And what Barry was able to identify, this is like 20 odd years ago now, what Barry was able to identify was that there was an increasing reports of cancer within the police. And it tended to be facial cancer or eye socket cancer, and it tended to follow that whichever side they wore, what Jim Davidson used to call the talking brooch, whatever side they wore it, that was where the cancer developed. So, and the reason this information was coming to the fore was because the police had an occupational health service which was there to enable the police to get sort of rapid medical consultation and not have to sort of go to their own GP. And so the police occupational health service was collating this data about these increased cancer clusters. So what did the police do about it? They disbanded the occupational health service. So the police had to go to their own GP, and of course the GPs then wouldn't pick up the fact that there were clusters. So the establishment, the corporatocracy, is very astute at finding ways to mitigate what starts to unfold. So they start with denial, and then when it becomes impossible to deny, they just find ways to make sure that really nobody's aware about it. And of course this is now manifesting in places around the country. And this was perhaps the one that got most people's attention back in 2008. The Bridge End suicides. And does anybody remember the official report as to why these suicides occurred? No, that's the correct response, because there has never been an investigation into the Bridge End suicides. So it was estimated that, at the low end it was like 38 suicides, but at the top end it was like 76. and there's been no investigation whatsoever. Now, there were two individuals who took it upon themselves to take a look at what was occurring in Bridgend. And one of those individuals was Barry Trower. And he went to Bridgend and he was able to ascertain that every one of those teen suicides lived within 80 metres of a phone mast. So this is like, what, 2G, 3G back then. Now, another guy went there who was a medical practitioner who had access to the medical records, and he was able to ascertain that every one of these teen suicides was either on or had recently come off the course of Ritalin. So consider the possibility that it was actually maybe even a combination of the two. But obviously it's conjecture, because we don't know, because there's never been any official investigation, and there won't be. Or if there has been, they will certainly not release the reports, because obviously it would be pretty damning. So now, of course, here we go, you know, a decade on, and we have a situation in Bristol. But I just want to show you this actually, because this is, again, showing how the weaponised vocabulary is used. So this is a report from 2017, and interestingly, this is when the problems at Bristol University first started to manifest. But this article says, suicide is not something you can catch, the mystery behind the small Welsh town of Bridgend where 23 men committed suicide in 1 year. But here's what I want to draw your attention to, this comment here in the paper. However, the deaths continued far beyond that time frame, and reports suggest that in the 5 years up to February 2012, 79 people took their lives in the wider county borough of Bridgend. There were rumours of internet suicide cults and pacts, and even a conspiracy theory that suggested that young minds had been damaged by radio frequencies. So there you go again. Weaponised vocabulary, conspiracy theory, so anybody who has the audacity to suggest that radio frequencies might have played some role here is just a rampant conspiracy theorist. Yeah. So then sort of roll the clock, and we had the situation in Bristol, where we had the spate of suicides, which had been blamed by the university on students being ill-prepared for university life and the stresses of exam preparation. One problem, though, is that the cluster of suicides, each of these suicides were in halls of residence, and their hall of residence was in close proximity to the university's 5G test centre. Same in York. But of course it's denied because there is too much money at stake. Because universities now are sort of basically following the US model, and have you seen the salaries of chancellors of universities? I mean, they failed in probably whatever else they did, and then they get invited to be a chancellor. And actually the reason they're brought in to be chancellor is because of a track record or association with corporations. And a lot of their salary is based on how much money they're actually able to bring into the university. And so these chancellors are earning anything between $250,000 and $500,000, plus benefits, plus accommodation, etc., etc. So obviously, anything that puts that revenue at risk, they're just going to try and dismiss. And so here was the admission about Bristol. It's from the university's Faculty of Engineering website, and this was, funnily enough, around that period that the Sun article appeared. And here's the observation: a world-class 5G technology test network aiming to put Britain at the forefront of the next wave mobile technology, potentially adding up to 173 billion to the economy by 2030. The University of Bristol's Smart Internet Lab, along with 5G experts from the University of Surrey, King's College London, has been awarded 16 million by the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. 16 million, let's say that Bristol University's share of that was a quarter, let's say it's 4 million. That's significant income, and consequently it will be enough to make sure that the Chancellor and other senior members of staff just don't get drawn into this debate. Now, a student union official who was taking a sabbatical year to be an officer of the Students' Union in Bristol was asking the hard questions, so they cancelled his course and ran him off the campus. So you can see where this is going. And now, those who are concerned about this have published documentation, advice to students, advice to parents, questions that they can ask the university about where the Wi-Fi routers are located, where the nearest phone masts are, etc., etc. Whether people do that, I'm really not that sure it would be the case. So let's see what's going on now around the country, because what we have in Bournemouth is going to be one of the areas where 5G is rolled out sooner rather than later. And I'm going to show you a couple of, well, one video. I'm going to show you one video from Bournemouth, because this video has been put out as a promo video by Ordnance Survey, because Ordnance Survey have discovered that there is a massive revenue opportunity by helping local authorities and the industry locate the best position for the 5G transmitters. Now, in this video, I want you to listen very carefully to what Ruth Spencer, who's one of the Bournemouth, well, she's the Bournemouth Council project manager for the 5G rollout. But listen very carefully to what she says are a problem for 5G frequencies.
We understand surveying data and we understand the importance of accuracy, repeatability as well, so it's all about quality. Our 3D models are made out of what we call a point cloud. Each one of those points you can identify and put attributes to it, so you can find a lot about the materials it's made of, the surface types, history of that data as well. So they're intelligent 3D models.
Our role in it was really to supply as many data sets as we possibly could for Ordnance Survey for the project. Everything from street lighting and lampposts and bus shelters all the way through to the types of tree growing in Horseshoe Common in the town centre of the Lansdowne.
The data that we provided to our project partners was really important because it filled in one of the key knowledge gaps in the project. The 5G Innovation Centre partners really worked out how radio waves would transmit around that cityscape. And then the Met Office were able to really drop real weather on top of that, just to show exactly how much that might change if it started to rain really heavily.
In terms of the signal propagation, it was really important for Ordnance Survey to be able to understand lines of sight for this project. And obviously, you know, if you have foliage or trees or even hanging baskets in the town centre, that can affect how the signal is transmitted.
To our knowledge, no other mapping technology would be able to do that efficiently. The Ordnance Survey 3D mapping with a high resolution and fast computing of this information, that was unique expertise that brought into the project.
The opportunities are endless having completed this project. Ordnance Survey have got a fantastic opportunity to exploit what we've learnt on the 5G project, not just for 5G, but for other initiatives as well. Digital built Britain, connected autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things, and underground asset. Having good, accurate 3D models just opens up so many doors for the future.
So did you hear what she said? Yeah. Trees, leaves and hanging baskets. Hanging baskets. And the problem is, and it's spelled out by University of Surrey, and to find the report I'm going to refer to, you've only got to put in University of Surrey 5G trees and section 3.1 of that report, and it spells out the problems of trees. And the trees are problem number one. Trees with leaves on, problem number two. Trees with leaves with water droplets on are a total block. So water is a total block. What are we primarily made of? Yeah. Reducing carbon footprint is a euphemism for something else, but that's another subject. The tree issue. This was a blind. The nation's attention was kept on Sheffield, where the community had come together to resist the culling of the trees because they had established that there was a contract with Amy, the Public Finance Initiative, to take care of the trees and make sure the pavements and the roads were not unduly affected by the roots. That was the official version of events. But actually it was entirely related, is entirely related to the rollout of 5G. Because they need the trees removed to be able to get the direct line of sight. And the Sunday Times actually did a Freedom of Information request and established that Sheffield was actually not even top of the list, and that in fact Newcastle was at the top of the list, with Newcastle having culled 8,414 trees to Sheffield 3,529, Edinburgh 4,435. But what the Sunday Times was able to establish was up until this time last year, 110,000 trees have been culled. Well, this is nothing compared to Network Rail's announcement that they were going to have to cull 8 million trees. Now, I have a friend who works in disaster management, and he's in his mid-50s now, very highly regarded as a civil engineer, and he has participated in the post-event analysis of pretty much every major global disaster, particularly those involving engineering in some way, shape or form, since 9/11. And he says that, Ian, the problem that they're seeing is that our young engineers are not even being taught the basics. And many of them can't do mental arithmetic. So they're totally reliant on the calculations that are generated by the software that they're using. And they have no capacity, because they don't have the knowledge, to be able to even roughly calculate whether that number's correct. They simply take it as gospel. And he said that, so, with the railways, you've got a situation where when the engineers, the Victorian engineers, were building the railways, and obviously they were trying to reduce the gradients, so they were making cuttings and embankments, and they were planting trees on the sides for a number of reasons. Number one, obviously, to provide a counter to the pollution. Number two was a screen, so that the railways weren't the eyesore. And number three was to bind the soil, to keep the embankments and the cuttings in place. And now the reason they need to cut the trees is because in May of next year, the European signalling system is going to be rolled out, and guess what it operates on? 5G. So they have to absolutely ensure that there is total line of sight between the transmitters and whatever the receiver is, otherwise the signalling system goes down, and we know where that's going to lead. So, as my friend says, people are just not thinking things through. They're looking at things one-dimensionally without actually even considering the ramifications. So, I'm just going to add briefly to what John said, because about the LED streetlights, because the LED streetlights are being rolled out right across the country at a phenomenal rate of knots, because they are being they have the capability for retrofitting the 5G transmitter. So if it's a normal 2G, 3G light control device, that could be on the top, but then at some point just come in and plug and play with the 5G. Now, one of the problems with the blue light frequency is that, as John said, it does disrupt the hormonal balance, because it disrupts our sleep patterns, the circadian rhythm. So it causes a hormonal imbalance, and it's the hormonal imbalance that triggers breast and prostate cancers. But the blue light is on our phones as well, and if you have a smartphone, of course it isn't smart for you or me, but if you have a smartphone, then you absolutely need to be sure that you have the blue light filter activated. Every Android has a blue light filter on it. Apple, some of the phones I believe don't, but you can download an app, and when you see the difference between the white light and the blue light, you'll know exactly what I mean. Now, I do a lot of night driving, and I was realising that I was getting back from some of these trips, and often I get back about sort of 2 o'clock to wherever I was going. And of course, normally by that time I'd be ready for lay in bed and fall asleep. And I was finding that as the smart motorways were being opened up, and I was spending more time on the smart motorway, it was actually causing me to not be able to get to sleep. So I switched to driving with the yellow glasses, which act as a blue light filter, and now everything's fine. Now this is part of the problem as well, because I think the industry is working on the basis of we'll find the solution. But it's not an ideal solution to have everyone wearing night driving glasses. But absolutely avoid the phone late in the evening unless you have that blue light filter on. Now, how can we stop this? Well, as I said earlier, the one thing that the establishment has struggled to deal with the anti-fracking campaign is community activism. There are parts of the country that have been clearly infiltrated, and when they've been infiltrated, then it's been a lot more difficult there, but not impossible. It's been a lot more difficult, but it's meant that groups have had to set up to run parallel. But I want to share with you one of the absolute successes of the community activism, and this is from Yorkshire. And in East Yorkshire, where Rathin Energy were trying to establish a presence, we're still trying to establish a presence, but they had a well site at a place called Crawberry Hill, just outside Beverley. And there was a group of about 15 retirees, all between the ages of 72 and late 80s. And they called themselves the Jerry Activists. They were all fine, upstanding members of the local community. One was former Director of Education and Children's Services for East Riding Council, one was the former leader of Hull City Council, one was a former NASA engineer, a couple of teachers, but you get the idea. Anyway, the police didn't want to arrest them, and Rathin Energy didn't want to have them arrested because it would have been negative publicity that these people who had contributed so much to the community during the course of their working lives now find themselves being arrested because of a conscience that they have about this industry coming into town. Well, to cut a long story short, this group of Jerry activists blockaded that well site every time a vehicle went in. And they would just stand in front, and the police would be happy to let them do it until dusk. But eventually Rathin Energy realised that these people were never going to give them a free ride. It was never going to be easy for them. And so consequently, Rathin Energy announced that they were going to abandon Crawberry Hill without even going back and testing the well that they'd drilled 5 years previously. And they were going to return the well site to its former agricultural glory. So that's an example of how effective focused community action can be. Elsewhere, community groups, they're going through all the process of challenging through planning reviews and challenging at the council. It's a long, drawn-out process. Yes, it's a war of attrition. And obviously it's not completely over yet, but it's not looking good for the industry. But with 5G, we don't have 5 years, because the game plan is that 5G is rolled out across all of the cities and large towns in this country by the end of next year, and right across the country by 2025. Now, as I was discussing with somebody earlier, this is not going to be easy because the establishment, the government and the corporations have colluded to make it extremely difficult for local authorities to participate in the rollout of phone masts. Because this is regarded as what I call a SNP, it's actually an NSIP, but it's a nationally significant infrastructure project. So all the phone companies have to do to put up a phone mast is acquire access to a plot of land, and once they've acquired the access to that land, they can simply erect a phone mast in an urban area up to 75 feet, and in a rural area up to 85 feet. The only thing they have to do is let the local authority know that they're going to put the mast up there. And for some local authorities, and Exeter tried this with me the other day when I was speaking with Exeter City Council, and I said I wanted to speak with whomever was the officer responsible for health, safety and environment in Exeter. Anyway, obviously they were quite curious as to what my concern was, and I said, well actually I want to discuss the issue of 5G and LED streetlights. And they said, oh, that's not us. That's not us. And I said, well, whose responsibility would it be then? And they said, well, 5G is Ofcom, and the streetlights are Devon County Council. So I said, well, actually, it's not that simple. You can just dismiss it or abdicate to Ofcom, because Ofcom has a responsibility to promote the telecommunications industry. Whereas your constitution clearly states that your officers and the elected members have a responsibility for the health, safety and well-being of the people within the community. So anyway, they took that on board and said, yeah, we'll get back to you. And I said, well, with the street lighting, who would I need to speak to about the street lighting? And they put me on to Devon County Council, and I spoke to the assistant, I think it's Ian Thompson, off the top of my head. But anyway, he's the head of highways, and he sent me, obviously somebody passed on the question that I'd asked, so yesterday he sent me a sort of dismissive email saying that, yeah, well, we're rolling out the LED street lights as we get the government funding, and we've got no plans to install any kind of 5G control system. But that email actually opens up a whole range of other questions. And this is where the Freedom of Information request process is extremely important. If you are going to submit a Freedom of Information request, do it via the website whatdotheyknow.com. Whatdotheyknow.com. That website is monitored by the Information Commissioner. So once you put, and if you go to the website, you'll find it's very user-friendly. I mean, it might take a little while to get to grips with it in the first instance, but it helps you identify who the right person is that you need to be contacting. So you start by saying, Devon County Council, and then what's your issue, lighting, and take the Highways Department, etc. So once you submit your Freedom of Information request there, it's in the public domain, the Information Commissioner is monitoring it, and you will get a response. But generally, of course, what they try and do is if it's a subject they'd rather not discuss, then they'll try and kick the can down the road, and they play a war of attrition in the hope you'll get bored, keep writing follow-up emails, and you'll just go away. And unfortunately, a lot of people do. So what it does need is people in the community who are going to be really tenacious in pushing for the responses of the Freedom of Information requests. So, we're at the front end, unfortunately, of this campaign, 5G awareness. But, fracking only affected about 10% of the country, and most of those communities were in the north of England. And frankly, I didn't waste my time in the south of England because it was pretty evident that it was just going to be very small groups of people who were concerned in the south, whereas in the north the communities would come together, and if we beat it in the north, then by default hopefully we knock it on the head in the south. But with this is going to affect every single person. And frankly, the target isn't us. I'm generalising, there's a few people who it is. But those of us that are reaching dementia age, we are not their concern. They'll deal with us one way or another, or we'll just move on to whatever comes next before it becomes a real issue. The target here is our youth. And already the experiments are being conducted into the gullibility of our youth. And this is part of the social experiment, otherwise known as Extinction Rebellion. Just to see how gullible people are and whether they'll simply swallow a narrative that actually doesn't stand up to genuine scholastic examination. So, we know what we're up against. We're up against a corporatocracy and an establishment that is going to throw everything it possibly can at getting this technology out there. And there's another reason why I think that they want to do it at an obscene rate of knots, is because they want to have the capability of control. And part of the spectrum here is what's known in the military as active denial technology. Currently it works on about 95 gigahertz, but it doesn't have to. As John rightly observes, microwave ovens are operating on 2.4, 2.5 gigahertz. But active denial technology used in crowd management situations where the military are involved operates on 95 gigahertz. And they're going to have the full spectrum out there. So in the event of civil unrest, flick a switch. I only get involved in battles that I believe we collectively can win. And I think that once people actually do realise how pernicious this agenda is, then we will build that groundswell. And that's why it's so important to build it up through your local councillors, your district councillors, your county councillors, through the MPs, so that eventually there's a realisation that there's no possibility that the general public will accept this without a real fight. And let me tell you, I got word a few days ago that in Northern Ireland, the 5G awareness campaign there, in a couple of weekends' time, is running a course on the use of angle grinders. The Irish are not to be messed with. And obviously they're not there yet. And they, readily acknowledge that there's a whole process to work through first. But if that process fails, they are not going to allow the youth to be targeted in this way, and they will take direct action. And I'd like to think that it doesn't come to that, but if it does, it does. But it won't be through lack of trying as we build this network. So thanks very much for joining us this evening. Hopefully you will be motivated to do your own research. It is not our intention for you simply to regurgitate what we have said. That's not our intention at all. Our intention is simply to stimulate your own curiosity so that you will take a further look at the evidence that is out there. And if you want the science, then there's one website that I would recommend, and you can spend months on this website following all the links, and that's the EH Trust. It's the Environmental Health Trust. It's ehtrust.org. And there's way more information there than any of us could probably absorb in one lifetime. But that's the backup information to counter those who simply dismiss as a conspiracy theory. So thanks very much, and thanks for organising the event tonight.